Welcome to this deep dive. And today we're going to unpack a true crime story that's just as gripping as any Law and Order episode you've ever seen, but with the added weight of reality.
It's going to be a wild one.
It really is. And we'll be dissecting an episode of the podcast, Anatomy of Murder,
Okay.
which unravels this web of crimes that all stem from this single murder in Brooklyn
Oh, wow.
back in 2001.
Yeah.
And what makes this case so compelling is that it goes beyond simply finding the culprit.
Yeah.
It's about the devastating ripple effects of violence, the incredible courage of witnesses who risk everything to testify, and the tough choices that prosecutors have to make in a system where resources are stretched so thin.
Yeah, it's a fascinating look at how a single act of violence can just shake the foundations of the justice system, especially in communities already grappling with high crime rates.
Right, so let's transport ourselves back to 2001, Bedford-Stuyvesant, Brooklyn.
Okay.
Picture this, a neighborhood where 166 murders occurred in that year alone, just in that one police precinct. It's September 4th, and a group of teenagers are hanging out in Willoughby Park, seemingly just another night until Dennis Brown is shot and killed.
And what's tragic is that Dennis wasn't even the intended target.
Oh, wow.
The shooter, Wesley Sykes, was actually aiming for Dennis's brother, Corey.
And adding to the complexity, there were several witnesses to the crime, including Dennis's friend Bobby Gibson.
Right.
Bobby, just a teenager himself, was determined to do what was right to speak up and testify, but as we'll see, his commitment to justice came at a steep price.
Yeah, that's where the story takes a truly chilling turn.
Yeah.
Just days before Sykes' trial was set to begin, Bobby Gibson is found murdered.
Oh, no.
And to make matters worse, the police receive a tip that someone was overheard talking about laying Slay and K, street slang for killing Corey Brown, nicknamed Slay, and Bobby Gibson, known as K.
So someone wanted to ensure that those two would never make it to the courtroom.
Exactly.
Talk about a direct assault on the justice system itself.
It immediately raises the stakes and throws the entire case into a whole new level of danger and uncertainty.
Now the focus shifts to three young women who also witnessed Dennis Brown's murder.
Right.
They find themselves in the crosshairs of Dupree Turf, Harris Sykes' half-brother, who is suspected of trying to silence them.
And Harris allegedly used every tactic in the book, threats, bribes, and even the chilling phrase, lie or die.
Wow.
Imagine the immense pressure these young women faced, caught between a desire to do the right thing and this very real threat of violence.
And here's where the ethical dimension of the case really comes into play.
Right.
These weren't wealthy socialites. They were young, living in poverty, facing all sorts of challenges in their lives.
Exactly.
It makes them even more vulnerable to this kind of intimidation.
Absolutely.
Would you have the strength to stand up to someone like Harris if you were in their shoes?
It's heartbreaking to think about the impossible situation they were thrust into. It raises serious questions about how we protect vulnerable witnesses, especially those whose socioeconomic circumstances make them easy targets.
And there's another twist that adds to the ethical quagmire. The defense attorney in the Sykes case is caught red-handed participating in the recording of the women's coerced recantations.
Wow. It's a shocking revelation that really exposes the lengths to which some within the legal system will go to manipulate the process, even if it means betraying their ethical obligations. It really makes you wonder about the potential for corruption and the challenges of ensuring fairness when such blatant misconduct occurs.
It's a dark moment, but there's a glimmer of hope. Despite the fear and intimidation, these three women find the incredible strength to step forward and testify, leading to Wesley Sykes' conviction for murder.
Their courage is truly inspiring. It demonstrates the power of individual resilience in the face of such overwhelming adversity.
So Sykes is behind bars, but the story doesn't end there. The investigation into Bobby Gibson's murder leads to the arrest of Travis Ragsdale, who confesses to the crime.
Okay.
However, he claims the motive was a personal dispute with Gibson. Not an attempt to silence a witness. He is eventually convicted, but only of second-degree murder.
And that lack of a first-degree murder conviction, which would have acknowledged the attempt to obstruct justice, leaves a lingering question. Was justice truly served if the full weight of the crime, the deliberate silencing of a witness, wasn't fully addressed in the verdict?
It almost feels like there are two levels of justice at play: justice for Dennis Brown's murder and justice for the silencing of Bobby Gibson.
Right.
And it seems like one was achieved while the other remains elusive.
Right. And it highlights the complexities of legal proceedings. Sometimes, even with a conviction, there's a sense that the truth hasn't been fully revealed, or that the punishment doesn't fully match the gravity of the crime.
With Sykes and Ragsdale behind bars, attention turns to Dupree Harris, who vanished after Bobby Gibson's murder.
Right.
He's eventually found living under an assumed name in Virginia.
His decision to flee certainly raises suspicions and adds to the mounting evidence suggesting his involvement in the witness intimidation.
And now the story takes on another layer of complexity as the focus shifts to protecting the three young women who are crucial witnesses against Harris. They're placed in witness protection, but as you might imagine, the reality is far from the glamorous Hollywood version.
Yeah, the reality of witness protection is often harsh and isolating. Imagine having to sever ties with your loved ones, uproot your entire life, and live in constant fear of being found. It's a testament to their bravery that these women endured those conditions for an entire year.
Think about it. Financial strain, separation from loved ones, and the constant worry that someone might be looking for them. They essentially had to go off the grid, sacrificing their normal lives to ensure that justice could be served.
Their willingness to make those sacrifices speaks volumes about their commitment to seeing this case through, even at a personal cost.
It really puts the whole idea of seeking justice in a different light, doesn't it? It's not just about courtroom battles and legal arguments. It's about real people facing real dangers and making incredible sacrifices to do what they believe is right.
Absolutely. And in this case, the challenges of protecting witnesses and ensuring their safety become even more pronounced given their vulnerability. And remember, these women had initially recanted their statements. So not only are they dealing with the trauma of witnessing a murder and the pressure from Harris, but they're also facing a legal system that might question their credibility.
Yeah, it's a classic catch-22. They recant out of fear, which then makes their testimony less reliable in the eyes of the law, potentially undermining the entire case against those responsible for the intimidation.
Right.
It makes you wonder what was going through their minds when they decided to recant. Was it purely fear, or was there a sense of hopelessness? Like, even if they testified, nothing would really change.
It's likely a combination of factors.
Mhm.
The constant threats, the lack of resources, the feeling of being trapped in a system that doesn't seem to offer much protection. It all contributes to a sense of desperation. And when someone like Harris comes along and offers a way out, even if it's a dangerous one, it can be tempting to take it.
So they're caught between a rock and a hard place. And their decision to ultimately cooperate with the prosecution, knowing the risks involved, really speaks volumes about their strength and their commitment to justice.
Their testimony was crucial in securing Sykes' conviction for Dennis Brown's murder. It shows that even in the face of intimidation, the truth can prevail, but it comes at a cost.
And speaking of cost, the case of Bobby Gibson's murder is a bit more ambiguous. We have Ragsdale's confession, but he claims it was a personal dispute, not witness silencing, even though the timing seems awfully suspicious.
Yeah, without concrete evidence directly linking Harris to the murder, the prosecution had to rely on Ragsdale's account. But let's be honest, even if we take his claim of a personal dispute at face value, it's hard to ignore the timing and the connection to the upcoming trial.
It feels like there are pieces of the puzzle missing, like we might never know the full truth about what happened to Bobby Gibson.
That lingering uncertainty is part of what makes this case so haunting. There's a sense of incomplete justice, a feeling that some threads were left untied.
Now, while all of this is happening, Dri Harris disappears for a while after Bobby Gibson's murder, but is eventually found living under an assumed name in Virginia.
That flight in itself is telling. It suggests a consciousness of guilt, an attempt to evade responsibility for his actions.
And when he finally does face trial, he's acquitted of a murder charge related to a 1999 case. Talk about adding fuel to the fire. It puts even more pressure on the prosecution to secure a conviction in the witness intimidation case.
That acquittal in the 1999 case underscores the challenges of prosecuting individuals with a history of alleged witness tampering. It creates a climate of fear, making people hesitant to cooperate with the authorities, which can weaken future cases.
It's a vicious cycle, and in this instance, the prosecution is acutely aware that they need to keep those three young women safe, not only for their sake, but also to ensure that they can testify against Harris.
Which brings us back to the limitations of witness protection programs. Local authorities often lack the resources of federal programs, making it incredibly difficult to provide adequate protection for witnesses facing serious threats.
These women were essentially uprooted from their lives, forced into hiding, isolated from friends and family. They endured financial hardship, emotional strain, and constant fear for their safety, all for an entire year.
It's a staggering sacrifice to make, and their ordeal highlights the urgent need for better support systems for witnesses, especially those who are most vulnerable and facing life-threatening situations.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal aspects of a case, but we can't lose sight of the human cost. Dennis Brown and Bobby Gibson lost their lives, and those three women had their worlds turned upside down.
It's a stark reminder that behind every headline, every court transcript, are real people who have suffered immense loss and trauma.
So, after a year of waiting, delays, and unimaginable challenges, the trial against Dri Harris for witness bribery and intimidation finally begins. You can feel the tension in the air. The outcome of this trial will have a significant impact, not just for Harris, but also for those three women who have risked so much to testify against him.
And let's not forget the elephant in the room. These women had initially recanted their statements. So the jury has to grapple with that inconsistency to decide whether they believe the women are now telling the truth.
It becomes a high-stakes test of credibility, a weighing of evidence motivations, and the potential influence of fear and intimidation. The defense is likely going to try to use those recantations to their advantage, while the prosecution will need to convince the jury that the women are now speaking truthfully.
It's a fascinating legal battle with both sides trying to sway the jury's perception of the witnesses and the events that transpired.
And after all that, the verdict finally comes in guilty on the bribery charges, but not guilty of witness intimidation. It's a mixed result, one that leaves both sides with a sense of unfinished business.
This split verdict is really intriguing. It suggests that the jury might have believed the women were bribed, but weren't fully convinced that they were also intimidated, or at least not to the extent required for a conviction on that charge.
It could be that they struggled to distinguish between bribery and intimidation, or maybe they were swayed by the defense's arguments about the women's inconsistent statements.
It's also possible that, despite acknowledging the bribery, they felt there wasn't enough evidence to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Harris had specifically intended to intimidate the witnesses.
It highlights the fact that legal proceedings are rarely clear-cut. The nuances of the law, the complexities of human behavior, and the subjective nature of jury deliberations all contribute to a process that doesn't always yield neat and tidy outcomes.
And while the split verdict might feel unsatisfying, it's important to remember that the legal system is designed to protect the rights of the accused, even those who are suspected of heinous acts. The burden of proof lies with the prosecution, and in this case, they were able to secure a conviction on the bribery charges.
So he wasn't found guilty of everything, but the system did ultimately hold him accountable for his actions.
Right. It's a reminder that the legal system, while imperfect, can still serve as a mechanism for justice. And while it might not always deliver the outcome we hope for, it provides a framework for resolving disputes, holding individuals responsible, and upholding the rule of law.
It's a complex and often frustrating process, but it's the system we have, and it's crucial to understand its intricacies and limitations if we want to advocate for meaningful change.
And, this case also reminds us that the pursuit of justice is rarely a solitary endeavor.
Yeah.
It requires the cooperation of witnesses, the diligence of law enforcement, the skill of prosecutors, and the careful deliberation of juries.
And it's a process that's deeply affected by human factors: fear, ambition, prejudice, compassion, the desire for truth, and the struggle for power.
It's a reminder that the law is not simply a set of abstract principles. It's a reflection of our values, our biases, and our ongoing efforts to create a more just and equitable society.
This deep dive has taken us through a labyrinth of legal proceedings, ethical dilemmas, and human tragedies. We've seen the devastating consequences of violence, the courage of those who choose to speak out, and the complexities of a justice system that's constantly striving for balance.
It's a story that compels us to ask difficult questions about the nature of truth, the limits of accountability, and the enduring impact of trauma.
And it reminds us that behind every case file are real people whose lives have been irrevocably altered by the events that brought them into contact with the legal system.
It's a sobering thought, one that should inspire us to approach these issues with empathy, nuance, and a commitment to understanding the human stories that lie at the heart of every legal battle.
We followed the twists and turns of this case, from the murder trials to the witness intimidation and the challenges of witness protection. But I keep finding myself wondering, what happened to those three young women after the trials? Did they ever find some sense of normalcy, of peace?
It's a question that lingers in my mind as well. Unfortunately, the source material we're working with doesn't provide much detail about their lives after they testified.
That's a shame. You get so invested in their story, their bravery, their willingness to stand up for what's right, that you want to know they were able to rebuild their lives and find some measure of closure.
It's a poignant reminder that these cases aren't just abstract legal battles playing out in courtrooms. They involve real people whose lives are profoundly and permanently affected by the events, even after the trials end and the verdicts are delivered.
Right. The trauma, the disruption, the fear they endured, it doesn't simply vanish overnight.
No.
It makes you wonder about the long-term psychological and emotional impact of their experience.
Their willingness to come forward and testify, despite the immense pressure and danger, speaks volumes about their character and their commitment to justice. It's a powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to rise above adversity.
Absolutely. They were just teenagers when this nightmare began, and they faced unimaginable challenges with remarkable resilience. They had to make incredibly difficult choices in a situation where there were no easy answers.
This case truly underscores the vital role that witnesses play in the pursuit of justice. Without their willingness to speak out, convictions would be far more difficult to secure, and perpetrators might escape accountability.
It makes you think about the responsibilities we all have as citizens to be courageous enough to speak up when we witness wrongdoing, to support those who are vulnerable, and to demand a system that protects those who seek justice.
And this case also exposes the shortcomings of our current witness protection programs. The fact that these women had to endure such hardship for an entire year, separated from loved ones living in fear, facing financial strain, points to a desperate need for greater resources and support for those who put their lives on the line to testify.
It's a stark reminder that seeking justice often comes at a high personal cost, and it's often the witnesses who bear the brunt of that burden.
It raises critical questions about how we as a society can better support and protect those who are essential to the functioning of our legal system.
It's easy to get caught up in the legal intricacies of a case like this, the arguments, the evidence, the strategies, but we can't forget the human cost, the lives that were lost and forever altered. Dennis Brown and Bobby Gibson were robbed of their futures, and those three women had their worlds turned upside down.
It's a sobering thought, and it compels us to remember that behind every headline, every court transcript, every legal battle are real people who have suffered immense loss and trauma. Their stories deserve to be heard and their sacrifices honored.
This deep dive into Anatomy of Murder has been a heavy one. It's exposed the dark underbelly of the justice system, the lengths to which some will go to silence the truth, and the immense sacrifices demanded of those who dare to speak up. But it's also a story of resilience, courage, and the unwavering pursuit of justice, even when the path is fraught with obstacles and the outcome uncertain.
It leaves us with a profound sense of the complexities of the human experience and the intricate workings of the legal system. It challenges us to confront uncomfortable truths about our society and to grapple with questions of morality, accountability, and the pursuit of a more just world.
So what can we take away from all of this? What does it mean for us, the listeners, as we navigate our own lives and engage with the world around us? Perhaps the most crucial takeaway is that justice is not a guaranteed outcome. It's a process often messy and imperfect that requires constant vigilance and a commitment to truth and accountability.
It also encourages us to think critically about the role we each play in supporting a just society, whether it's by speaking out against wrongdoing, advocating for better witness protection programs, or simply listening with empathy to the stories of those who have been impacted by violence and injustice. We all have a part to play in shaping a more equitable and compassionate world.
We may never know the full truth about what happened that night in Willoughby Park or in the years that followed, but this deep dive has given us a glimpse into the human drama that unfolds behind the headlines, reminding us that justice is not just a legal concept. It's a shared responsibility that demands our ongoing attention and action. It's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it, prompting reflection and challenging us to consider how we can contribute to a world where such tragedies are less likely to occur and where the pursuit of justice is more accessible to all.